The morning sun painted the Irish countryside in soft golden hues as Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge, stepped out of the black Range Rover. The crisp March air carried the scent of fresh grass and wildflowers, a perfect backdrop for St. Patrick's Day celebrations. She smoothed down her emerald green coat, a thoughtful nod to the Irish holiday, and checked her watch. The visit to the military base was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. Kate had always felt a special connection to the armed forces. Her role as Colonel-in-Chief of the Irish Guards meant these visits were more than just royal duties. They were personal connections with brave men and women who served their country. Today's visit was particularly special, as she would be meeting the newest members of the regiment's K-9 unit. The Mons Barracks stretched before her, its red brick buildings standing proudly against the green landscape. Soldiers in crisp uniforms moved with purpose across the courtyard, their boots creating rhythmic sounds on the cobblestones. The Union Jack fluttered in the gentle breeze, accompanied by the distinctive green flag bearing the shamrock emblem of the Irish Guards. "Your Royal Highness," greeted Colonel Michael Harrison, a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He had served with the Irish Guards for over 20 years and had met Kate several times during her previous visits. "Welcome back to Mons Barracks. The men are absolutely delighted you could join us for our St. Patrick's Day preparations." Kate smiled warmly, her genuine interest evident in her bright blue eyes. "Colonel Harrison, it's wonderful to be here again. I understand you have some very special new recruits for me to meet today." "Indeed we do, ma'am. Our K-9 unit has recently welcomed 3 new members. They're quite remarkable animals, highly trained, and already showing exceptional promise. The handlers are eager to demonstrate their capabilities." As they walked toward the training grounds, Kate noticed small clusters of soldiers pausing in their duties to offer respectful nods. Some of the younger recruits seemed particularly excited, whispering among themselves about the royal visit. She had learned over the years that these informal moments often meant as much to the troops as the official ceremonies. The training area was a large open space surrounded by various obstacle courses and training equipment. Several handlers stood ready with their K-9 partners, their pride evident in their straight postures and bright expressions. The dogs, a mix of German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, and one particularly striking golden retriever, sat obediently beside their handlers, though their alert eyes tracked every movement around them. The training program has evolved significantly over the past few years, Colonel Harrison explained as they approached. These dogs are trained not just for security and detection work, but also for therapeutic support for our veterans returning from deployment. The bond between soldier and dog often proves invaluable in the healing process. Kate nodded thoughtfully. She had read about the increasing use of therapy animals in military settings and was genuinely interested in learning more. "That's wonderful to hear. The mental health and well-being of our service members is so incredibly important." Sergeant Emma Walsh, a petite woman with auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun, stepped forward with her partner, a magnificent German shepherd named Braveheart. The dog's black and tan coat gleamed in the sunlight, and his intelligent dark eyes seemed to assess everything around him with calm confidence. "Your Royal Highness, this is Braveheart," Sergeant Walsh said, her Irish accent adding a musical quality to her words. "He's been with us for 6 months now and has excelled in both detection and protection training. He's also shown remarkable aptitude for therapeutic work." Kate knelt down to the dog's level, extending her hand for him to sniff. Braveheart approached slowly, his tail wagging gently as he accepted her gentle pat. "He's beautiful, Sergeant Walsh. How did he come to join the unit?" "He was actually rescued from a shelter in Belfast, ma'am. Someone surrendered him because they couldn't handle his energy levels. But what they saw as a problem, we saw as potential. High energy and intelligence are exactly what we look for in our working dogs." As Kate continued to interact with Braveheart, she noticed another dog watching intently from nearby. This one was clearly younger, with slightly oversized paws that suggested he was still growing into his adult frame. His coat was a beautiful golden color, and his expression held an endearing mixture of eagerness and uncertainty. "And who might this handsome fellow be?" Kate asked, rising to move toward the golden retriever. Corporal James Mackenzie, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25, beamed with pride. "This is Murphy, Your Royal Highness. He's our newest addition and still completing his basic training. He's got tremendous potential, though he's still learning to control his enthusiasm." Murphy's tail began wagging furiously at the attention, and Kate couldn't help but smile at his obvious joy. Unlike the calm, controlled demeanor of the other dogs, Murphy seemed to vibrate with barely contained excitement. His eyes never left Kate's face, and she could see the intelligence there, even if it was currently overshadowed by puppy-like enthusiasm. "He's quite spirited, isn't he?" Kate laughed as Murphy's tail wagged so hard his entire back and wiggled. "How old is he?" "Just turned 18 months, ma'am. He's still got some growing up to do, but his nose is already incredible. He found a training device yesterday that had been hidden for over a week. Even the experienced dogs had missed it." Kate reached out to pet Murphy, and his excitement level immediately increased. His tail wagged harder, and he seemed to dance on his paws, clearly wanting to jump up for attention, but fighting against his training to remain seated. The internal struggle was visible and rather endearing. "He reminded me of our family dog when William and I first got him," Kate shared, thinking of Lupo, their beloved English Cocker Spaniel. All energy and love with just a touch of mischief in his eyes. The comment made several of the handlers chuckle, and Kate could see them relaxing slightly. She had learned that sharing personal touches helped bridge the gap between royal protocol and genuine human connection. These soldiers dedicated their lives to service, and she wanted them to know she saw them as individuals, not just uniforms. Colonel Harrison gestured toward a demonstration area where several obstacles had been set up. "Perhaps you'd like to see some of the training exercises, Your Royal Highness?" The dogs enjoy showing off their skills, and I think you'll find their capabilities quite impressive. "I'd love that," Kate replied enthusiastically. "Lead the way." As they moved toward the demonstration area, Murphy fell into step beside Kate, his handler keeping a careful eye on his behavior. The young dog seemed completely enchanted by the royal visitor, occasionally looking up at her with an expression of pure adoration that made several of the soldiers smile. The demonstration area buzzed with activity as handlers prepared their dogs for the showcase. Kate found herself positioned at the best vantage point, flanked by Colonel Harrison and several other senior officers. The March breeze had picked up slightly, causing her hair to dance around her shoulders, which she tucked behind her ears with practiced ease. Sergeant Walsh and Braveheart were the first to demonstrate. The exercise involved a complex search and detection scenario where explosive materials had been hidden throughout a mock village setup. Kate watched in fascination as Braveheart methodically worked his way through the area, his nose twitching as he processed countless scents. His movements were precise and purposeful, each step calculated. "The training process takes about 18 months, Colonel Harrison explained quietly as they watched. "The dogs learn to identify dozens of different scents, from explosives to drugs to missing persons. But it's not just about their noses. They need to have the right temperament, the ability to work under pressure, and absolute trust in their handlers." Braveheart suddenly froze near an overturned wheelbarrow, his body going rigid in a perfect alert position. Sergeant Walsh immediately recognized the signal and moved forward carefully. Hidden beneath some old sacking was a training device designed to mimic explosive materials. The watching soldiers applauded appreciatively as Braveheart received his reward, a favorite toy and enthusiastic praise from his handler. "Remarkable," Kate murmured, genuinely impressed by the precision and dedication she had witnessed. "The bond between them is so clear. How long have they been working together?" "About 4 months now, ma'am," Sergeant Walsh replied, her pride evident as she gave Braveheart another affectionate pat. "He's been the perfect partner. Steady, reliable, and incredibly brave. Last month, during a training exercise that simulated combat conditions, he never wavered despite loud noises and smoke effects that would spook most dogs. Next, Corporal Mackenzie and Murphy prepared for their demonstration. Kate noticed immediately that Murphy's energy seemed even higher than before, as if he understood he was about to perform and could barely contain his excitement. His tail hadn't stopped wagging since they'd moved to the demonstration area, and he kept glancing between his handler and Kate as if making sure she was still paying attention. Now, Murphy is still in training, Corporal Mackenzie explained, his voice carrying a note of gentle warning. He's incredibly talented, but he's also still learning impulse control. Sometimes his enthusiasm gets the better of him. The exercise set up for Murphy was designed to test his detection abilities and obedience under distraction. Several scented objects have been placed around the area, and Murphy's job was to locate them while ignoring various distractions, other people moving around, sounds from nearby training exercises, and even some food items that might tempt a young dog. Murphy started strong, his nose immediately picking up the trail of the first hidden object. Kate found herself leaning forward, invested in his success. The young dog moved with surprising focus, his golden coat shining in the afternoon sun as he worked methodically through the course. "He's doing wonderfully," Kate commented, genuinely impressed by Murphy's performance. Despite his youth and obvious excitement, he was demonstrating real skill and training. Murphy successfully located the first two objects, earning praise from his handler and approving nods from the watching officers. But as he approached the third location, something changed. His head lifted suddenly, and his attention seemed to shift. Kate followed his gaze and realized with amusement that Murphy had spotted her again. The young dog's professional focus wavered as he seemed torn between completing his task and investigating this fascinating visitor more closely. His tail wagged uncertainly, and Kate could almost see the internal debate playing out in his expressive eyes. "Murphy, focus," Corporal Mackenzie commanded gently, try to redirect his partner's attention back to the exercise. But Murphy had made his decision. With a burst of enthusiastic energy that caught everyone off guard, he abandoned the exercise and bounded directly toward Kate. His golden form moved with surprising speed across the demonstration area, his tongue hanging out happily and his eyes bright with determination to greet his new favorite person properly. Several things happened at once. Corporal Mackenzie called out in surprise and slight embarrassment. Colonel Harrison stepped forward instinctively. The other soldiers around the area turned to watch what was unfolding, and Kate, recognizing what was about to happen, took a small step backward while beginning to laugh. Murphy's approach was entirely friendly, but completely uncontrolled. In his excitement to reach Kate, he misjudged his speed and the terrain beneath his large paws. The demonstration area had been slightly dampened by an earlier rain shower, making the ground more slippery than usual. As Murphy tried to slow down for what he probably intended to be a gentle greeting, his paws lost traction on the slick surface. Kate watched with growing amusement and slight concern as Murphy's graceful bound turned into something more resembling an uncontrolled slide. His eyes widened with surprise as he realized he couldn't stop his forward momentum, and his paws scrambled futilely against the slippery ground. "Oh my!" Kate exclaimed, torn between laughter and concern for the young dog's dignity. Murphy, determined not to abandon his mission despite the mechanical difficulties, continued his slide toward Kate with the same enthusiasm that had started his adventure. His expression shifted from confident determination to bewildered concentration as he tried to figure out how to regain control of the situation. The watching soldiers held their breath, unsure whether to be mortified on behalf of their unit or amused by the spectacle. Murphy had become something of a beloved mascot during his short time with them, known for his intelligence, his heart, and his occasional spectacular mishaps that reminded everyone he was still very much a puppy in an adult dog's body. Colonel Harrison moved to intervene, but Kate raised a gentle hand to stop him. She had spent enough time around animals to recognize that Murphy meant no harm. He was simply an enthusiastic young dog who had gotten carried away by excitement and unexpected physics. Murphy's slide was taking him directly toward Kate's feet, and she realized with dawning amusement that they were both about to become part of a story that would likely be retold in the barracks for years to come. The young dog's expression had shifted to one of mild panic as he realized his greeting wasn't going according to plan, but he was clearly committed to seeing it through. Kate braced herself and couldn't help but smile widely at the approaching chaos. In all her years of royal duties, she had encountered many unexpected situations, but a sliding golden retriever was definitely a first. The absurdity of the moment, combined with Murphy's obvious good intentions and the beautiful Irish countryside setting, created a scene that felt more like something from a charming movie than a formal royal engagement. The soldiers around them began to realize that their Duchess was not alarmed but genuinely amused, and the tension in the air began to shift toward shared anticipation of how this delightful disaster would resolve itself. Murphy's uncontrolled slide reached its inevitable conclusion as he made contact with Kate's legs just below the knee. The impact wasn't hard, more like an enthusiastic, furry torpedo arriving for cuddles, but it was enough to disrupt Kate's balance on the slightly damp ground. For a moment that seemed frozen in time, she teetered gracefully, her arms windmilling slightly as she tried to maintain her footing. The assembled soldiers watched in collective held breath as their beloved Duchess performed an impromptu dance with gravity. Kate's face showed a mixture of surprise, amusement, and determination not to fall ungracefully in front of the troops. She managed to stay upright for several seconds, even as Murphy, having completed his slide, looked up at her with tail wagging and an expression that clearly said, "Hello, wasn't that fun?" But physics proved stronger than royal determination. Kate's heel caught slightly in the soft earth, and down she went in what could only be described as the most dignified tumble possible under the circumstances. She landed sitting on the grass with a soft thump, her emerald coat spread around her like a green puddle, her hair slightly mussed, and her expression shifting from surprise to pure, delighted laughter. Murphy, thrilled that his new friend had joined him at ground level, immediately seized this opportunity to complete his original mission of proper greetings. He bounded over and began enthusiastically licking Kate's face, his tail creating a golden blur of happiness behind him. His wet nose pressed against her cheek, and his warm breath carried the scent of dog treats and boundless joy. "Murphy, down!" Corporal Mackenzie called out in mortification, rushing toward them. His face had gone pale as he contemplated the potential career implications of his dog, knocking over a member of the royal family. "I'm so sorry, Your Royal Highness. He's never done anything like this before." But Kate was laughing too hard to be bothered by protocol. Murphy's enthusiastic face washing had triggered a giggling fit that seemed to bubble up from deep inside her. Here she was, sitting in an Irish field on St. Patrick's Day, being thoroughly kissed by an overeager golden retriever while wearing one of her finest coats, and it struck her as absolutely hilarious. "Oh my goodness," she managed between laughs, gently trying to fend off Murphy's continued affection while simultaneously petting him. "Murphy, you're quite the charmer, aren't you?" The other soldiers began to relax as they realized Kate was genuinely enjoying herself rather than being horrified by the breach of protocol. Several of them were fighting their own smiles as they watched the scene unfold. It wasn't every day they got to see a member of the royal family engaged in an impromptu wrestling match with one of their four-legged recruits. Colonel Harrison approached more slowly, his initial concern giving way to relief and amusement. In his 20 years of military service, he had overseen countless royal visits, and while they were always pleasant and professional, they rarely included this level of spontaneous entertainment. "Your Royal Highness, are you hurt? Should we call a medic?" Kate looked up at him with sparkling eyes, still giggling as Murphy finally settled down to sit beside her, looking enormously pleased with himself. "I'm perfectly fine, Colonel Harrison. just a bit grass-stained and thoroughly charmed by this young fellow here. She gave Murphy another pat, and his tail immediately resumed its enthusiastic wagging. "Perhaps we should help you up, ma'am," offered Sergeant Walsh, though she too was clearly fighting back a smile at the entire situation. "In just a moment," Kate replied, seeming in no hurry to end her ground-level conversation with Murphy. "I want to make sure this handsome boy knows he's not in trouble." "Are you, Murphy? You're just enthusiastic, aren't you?" Murphy tilted his head at the sound of his name, and if a dog could look embarrassed, he was managing it. His earlier excitement had calmed into something more like bashful pride. He seemed to understand that he had perhaps been a bit too exuberant in his greeting, but Kate's continued attention and gentle voice told him that all was forgiven. Corporal Mackenzie finally reached them, his expression a mixture of mortification and relief. "Ma'am, I cannot begin to apologize enough. Murphy's training specifically covers appropriate behavior around dignitaries, and this is just—" He gestured helplessly at the scene before him. Kate reached out to pat Mackenzie's arm reassuringly. "Corporal, please don't worry for even a moment. Murphy was just being friendly, and honestly, this is the most fun I've had in an official engagement in months. Sometimes a little spontaneity is exactly what we need." The young soldier's relief was visible as his shoulders relaxed. "He really is a good dog, Your Royal Highness. He just got such a big personality, and when he likes someone, he really, really likes them." "Well, I'm quite flattered," Kate said, giving Murphy one more pat before accepting Colonel Harrison's offered hand to help her to her feet. As she stood, she brushed grass from her coat with practiced motions, though she didn't seem particularly concerned about the green stains that would probably require professional cleaning. Murphy stood as well, staying close to Kate's side as if he had appointed himself as her personal escort for the remainder of the visit. His earlier wild energy had settled into something more like devoted attention, though his tail continued its steady wagging. "I think Murphy has decided he's your official guard for the day," observed Sergeant Walsh with a grin. "He's not usually quite so selective in his affections." Kate looked down at Murphy, who was gazing up at her with what could only be described as adoration. "Well, Murphy, if you're going to be my guard, you need to work on your approach technique. A little less sliding, a little more stopping, perhaps." The assembled soldiers couldn't contain their chuckles anymore, and even Colonel Harrison was smiling broadly. The formal atmosphere of the royal visit had transformed into something much more relaxed and genuine. Kate had a gift for putting people at ease, but Murphy had managed to put everyone at ease in his own unique way. "Your Royal Highness," said Colonel Harrison, "perhaps we should continue with the tour? I believe the men have prepared some refreshments, and we could get you cleaned up a bit." "That sounds lovely," Kate agreed, then looked down at Murphy again. "Will my new friend be joining us for refreshments?" Corporal Mackenzie looked uncertain. "Well, typically the dogs don't participate in the formal portions of visits." "Oh, but this is hardly typical anymore, is it?" Kate pointed out with a smile. "Besides, Murphy clearly has more to show me about military hospitality, and I'd hate to hurt his feelings after he went to such effort to introduce himself properly." Murphy's tail wagged harder at the sound of his name, and he took a small step closer to Kate as if to reinforce his status as her chosen companion. The other soldiers exchanged glances, clearly charmed by both their royal visitor's good humor and their canine colleague's obvious infatuation. "In that case," Colonel Harrison said with a formal nod that didn't quite hide his amusement, "Corporal Mackenzie and Murphy will join us for the remainder of your visit. I'm sure the men will be delighted to see how well Murphy represents the unit." As they began walking toward the barracks building where refreshments waited, Murphy fell into step beside Kate with perfect military precision, as if his earlier enthusiastic greeting had simply been his way of breaking the ice before settling into proper professional behavior. Kate couldn't help but smile at his transformation from uncontrolled missile to dignified escort. The officers' mess had been transformed for the royal visit, with fresh flowers on every table and the finest china the barracks could muster. Large windows overlooked the training grounds where Kate had just experienced her memorable encounter with Murphy, and Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass, creating warm, golden pools on the polished wooden floor. Kate accepted a cup of tea and settled into a comfortable chair, amused to find that Murphy had positioned himself directly beside her, sitting at attention, but with his expressive eyes never leaving her face. He had achieved the perfect balance between proper military bearing and obvious devotion, and several of the officers couldn't help stealing glances at their unusually well-behaved colleague. "Your Royal Highness," began Major Patricia O'Brien, a woman in her 40s with intelligent green eyes and silver threading through her auburn hair. Murphy's enthusiasm today actually highlights something quite remarkable about our canine program. These dogs don't just follow orders. They form genuine emotional connections that enhance their effectiveness in the field. Kate sipped her tea thoughtfully while keeping one hand available for Murphy to occasionally sniff or gently nudge for attention. "That's fascinating. I imagine that emotional intelligence must be incredibly valuable in therapeutic applications as well." "Exactly right, ma'am," agreed Dr. Sarachan, a veterinary behaviorist who worked with the program. Murphy, despite his youth and today's exuberant display, has shown remarkable ability to sense when someone needs comfort. Last week, we had a veteran visiting who was struggling with some difficult memories. Murphy seemed to know instinctively and stayed close to him throughout the entire session. Corporal Mackenzie, who had been quietly sipping his tea while keeping a watchful eye on his partner, spoke up. "That's true, Your Royal Highness. Murphy might be energetic and sometimes overly friendly, but he's never made a mistake about someone's emotional state. If he thinks someone needs cheering up, he's usually right." Kate looked down at Murphy, who had somehow managed to scoot his sitting position incrementally closer to her chair without actually moving from his spot. "Is that what happened today, Murphy? Did you think I needed cheering up?" Murphy's tail thumped once against the floor at the sound of his name, and his head tilted slightly as if he was seriously considering the question. The assembled officers watched this exchange with growing smiles, clearly charmed by the obvious connection between their royal visitor and their four-legged recruit. "Actually," Kate continued thoughtfully, "he might have been right. Royal visits can sometimes feel quite formal, and while I always enjoy meeting with our service members, Murphy certainly added an element of surprise that made this visit particularly memorable." Colonel Harrison nodded appreciatively. "Your Royal Highness, your reaction to Murphy's unconventional greeting has meant a great deal to the men. They've been talking about nothing else since we moved inside. To see someone of your stature handle an unexpected situation with such grace and humor, well, it's exactly the kind of leadership they admire." Through the window, Kate could see other soldiers on the training grounds, many of whom kept glancing toward the officers' mess as if hoping to catch another glimpse of the unusual royal visit taking place inside. Word had clearly spread about Murphy's spectacular greeting and Kate's delighted response, and the entire atmosphere of the base seemed lighter somehow. "Speaking of the men," Kate said, setting down her teacup, "I'd love to meet some of the other soldiers if possible, and perhaps Murphy could introduce me. He seems to have appointed himself as my guide for the day." Major O'Brien's eyes lit up. "Actually, Your Royal Highness, that's a wonderful idea. The soldiers have been hoping for a chance to meet you, and Murphy is quite popular with everyone. He could indeed serve as your escort." As if understanding that his services were being discussed, Murphy stood and moved to position himself beside Kate's chair, his stance alert and ready. His earlier wild enthusiasm had matured into something more like professional eagerness, though his constantly wagging tail betrayed his continued excitement about his special assignment. "Well then, Murphy," Kate said, standing and smoothing her coat, which still bore faint grass stain from their earlier encounter. "Shall we go meet your colleagues?" The group moved through the barracks corridors, with Murphy maintaining perfect heel position beside Kate, as if he'd been trained for royal escort duty his entire life. Soldiers they passed in the hallways tried to maintain professional composure, but many couldn't help smiling at the sight of their Duchess being formally escorted by the unit's youngest and most enthusiastic canine member. They emerged into a large common area where off-duty soldiers had gathered, ostensibly for their usual afternoon break, but clearly hoping for a chance to meet their royal visitor. As Kate entered the room, the men and women quickly came to attention, but she immediately gestured for them to relax. "Please, stay comfortable," she said warmly. "I understand you've all met my new friend Murphy here, and I'd love to hear some stories about your experiences with the K-9 unit." Murphy, sensing that this was his moment to shine as a proper ambassador, began moving through the group of soldiers with Kate beside him. At each person, he would stop and sit, allowing them to pet him while Kate engaged them in conversation. It was as if he had transformed from an uncontrolled puppy into a professional therapy dog in the span of an hour. Private Jennifer Martinez, a young woman who had been with the unit for 6 months, shared how Murphy had helped her through homesickness during her first weeks of training. "He just seemed to know when I was feeling down, Your Royal Highness. He'd come find me and just sit with me until I felt better." Sergeant David Thompson told about Murphy's incredible detection work during a recent training exercise, where he had located a hidden device that even the more experienced dogs had missed. "He might be enthusiastic, ma'am, but his nose is absolutely extraordinary, and his determination is unmatched." With each story, Kate found herself increasingly impressed by Murphy's genuine impact on the unit, despite his youth and obvious personality quirks. The soldiers spoke about him with the kind of affection usually reserved for beloved family members, and it was clear that his earlier greeting of her had only enhanced his reputation as the unit's most endearing character. "Your Royal Highness," said Corporal Lisa Wong, a dog handler who worked with one of the German Shepherds. Murphy's greeting today was actually quite typical for him when he really likes someone. He's never knocked anyone over before, but he's definitely enthusiastic in his affections. We've all learned to brace ourselves when he gets excited about meeting someone new. Kate laughed, remembering her graceless tumble onto the grass. "Well, I'm honored to have received the full Murphy experience then. Though perhaps next time I'll wear more appropriate footwear for sudden, sliding encounters." The soldiers around them chuckled, and Kate noticed how relaxed everyone had become. Murphy had somehow managed to transform what could have been a stiff, formal interaction into something genuinely warm and personal. His presence gave everyone something to smile about, and a natural conversation starter that bridged the gap between royal protocol and human connection. As the informal meeting continued, Murphy seemed to sense that his diplomatic duties were being successfully completed. He remained alert and engaged, but his earlier manic energy had settled into something more like satisfied contentment. Every few minutes, he would look up at Kate as if checking to make sure she was still enjoying herself, and his tail would increase its wagging tempo whenever she looked back at him. As the afternoon drew toward evening, the time came for Kate's departure. The golden light of late day painted the barracks in warm hues, and the March air had grown cooler, carrying the promise of a beautiful Irish sunset. Soldiers had begun gathering near the entrance to bid farewell to their royal visitor, and there was a palpable sense of satisfaction in the air about how the day had unfolded. Murphy seemed to sense that his special assignment was coming to an end. He had remained by Kate's side throughout the entire afternoon, serving as both escort and unofficial ambassador for the K-9 unit. Now, as they walked toward the waiting vehicles, his steps had slowed slightly, and his usual boundless energy was tempered with something that looked remarkably like reluctance to say goodbye. "Your Royal Highness," Colonel Harrison said as they approached the Range Rover, "I cannot thank you enough for your patience and good humor today." Murphy's unconventional greeting could have created quite a diplomatic incident, but your response turned it into something the men will treasure for years to come. Kate paused beside the vehicle, looking back at the assembled soldiers, and then down at Murphy, who was sitting beside her in perfect formation, but with his eyes fixed sadly on her face. "Colonel Harrison, this has been one of the most delightful visits I've ever had." Murphy reminded me that sometimes the most meaningful connections happen when we least expect them. Corporal Mackenzie stepped forward, his face showing a mixture of pride in his partner and regret that the day was ending. "Ma'am, Murphy wanted me to give you this. He held out a small item that Kate recognized immediately. A tennis ball, well-worn and obviously beloved. This is Murphy's favorite toy, Mackenzie explained. He's never shared it with anyone before, but he brought it to me about an hour ago and kept looking at you. I think he wants you to have something to remember him by. Kate accepted the tennis ball with genuine emotion, turning it over in her hands. It was soft from countless games of fetch, and she could imagine Murphy racing across fields to retrieve it, his golden form a blur of joy and determination. This is incredibly special. Thank you, Murphy. Murphy's tail wagged at hearing his name, but he remained sitting, as if he understood the solemnity of the moment. Several of the watching soldiers were smiling at this final gesture from their canine colleague, clearly proud of his thoughtfulness. I have something for Murphy, too, Kate said, reaching into her handbag. She pulled out a small shamrock pin, the same type she had been wearing to honor St. Patrick's Day. This is to remind him that he made this St. Patrick's Day absolutely unforgettable for me. She knelt down to Murphy's level and carefully pinned the shamrock to his collar. Murphy sat perfectly still for the ceremony, seeming to understand the importance of the moment. When she finished, he leaned forward slightly and gave her cheek one gentle, farewell kiss. There, Kate said softly, her voice carrying genuine affection. Now everyone will know that Murphy is a very special dog who made friends with the Duchess on St. Patrick's Day. The assembled soldiers applauded softly, clearly moved by the exchange. Murphy looked down at his new decoration with what appeared to be pride, then back up at Kate with an expression that seemed to say he would treasure this moment forever. As Kate prepared to get into the vehicle, Dr. Chun approached with a folder. Your Royal Highness, we've prepared some information about the therapeutic work Murphy and the other dogs do with our veterans. We thought you might be interested in learning more about the program. I'm very interested indeed, Kate replied, accepting the folder. And I'd like to arrange for a donation to support the program. Today has shown me just how valuable this work truly is. Colonel Harrison's face lit up with gratitude. That's incredibly generous, ma'am. The funding will make a real difference in our ability to train and care for the dogs. Kate looked around at all the faces, human and canine, that had made her day so special. You know, when I woke up this morning, I thought I was simply coming to observe a training demonstration. Instead, I've learned about courage, loyalty, the importance of emotional connection, and the fact that sometimes the best diplomats have 4 legs and wet noses. The soldiers laughed appreciatively, and Murphy's tail wagged harder at the attention. Kate continued, Murphy, you've taught me that authenticity and enthusiasm, even when they lead to unexpected tumbles, can create more genuine connections than any amount of formal protocol. As Kate finally settled into the Range Rover, Murphy moved to the window and placed his paws on the door, looking in at her with his expressive brown eyes. She rolled down the window and reached out to give him one final pat. Take care of these fine soldiers, Murphy, she said gently. And remember, sometimes the most important greetings are worth a little grass stain. Murphy barked once, a sound that somehow managed to convey both farewell and promise. As the vehicle began to move, he trotted alongside for a few steps before stopping and sitting at attention, watching until the Range Rover disappeared around the corner. The soldiers remained gathered for several minutes after Kate's departure, sharing stories about the day's events and marveling at how their youngest canine recruit had managed to charm a member of the royal family so completely. Murphy, still wearing his shamrock pin proudly, accepted congratulations and pets from his human colleagues, but his eyes occasionally drifted toward the road where his new friend had disappeared. Word of Murphy's successful royal introduction spread quickly through military channels, and within days, the story of the sliding golden retriever who knocked over the Duchess of Cambridge and then served as her personal escort had become legendary throughout the Irish Guards. Photos of Kate with Murphy, grass stains, and all appeared in newspapers with headlines celebrating the most delightful royal mishap in recent memory. Months later, Kate would tell the story at various charity events supporting military families and veteran services, always emphasizing how Murphy's genuine enthusiasm and the soldiers' dedication to their canine partners had touched her heart. The tennis ball Murphy had given her found a place of honor on her desk, a reminder of the day when protocol gave way to authenticity and a young dog's exuberance created an unexpectedly perfect St. Patrick's Day memory. Murphy continued his training with renewed confidence, eventually becoming one of the unit's most successful detection dogs. But he never forgot his royal friend, and handlers would sometimes catch him looking hopefully toward the road when unfamiliar vehicles approached the barracks. The shamrock pin remained on his collar as a badge of honor, and whenever new visitors came to see the canine unit, the soldiers would inevitably tell the story of Murphy's famous royal greeting and the Duchess who took it all with such magnificent grace. Years later, military historians would note that Kate's visit to Mons Barracks represented a perfect example of how genuine human connections could transcend formal boundaries. But for those who were there that day, it would always be remembered more simply as the afternoon when Murphy the Golden Retriever decided to introduce himself to royalty in his own special way, creating a story that proved sometimes the best diplomacy happens on four legs with a wagging tail and an enthusiastic heart.